This is the second of two panels that I've been fortunate enough to be able to participate in as moderator on the topic of conversation being the medium of RPGs and the particular ways that that matters to games and gamers. I'm joined today by Che Webster of Roleplay Rescue, Daniel Jones of Primeval Fantasy, and James Bacon of Better with Bacon. And I have a surprise question for them to begin our discussion. But as with the previous group, which you saw in the previous video, these gentlemen were kind enough to donate of their time to answer a bunch of background questions to get everybody on the same page, get them familiar with each other, and familiar with where this topic might go. You can hear their responses to those background questions by following the links in the description box below, or by, of course, going to the Casting Shadows blog and seeing the post there. But, gentlemen, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
No sweat. Here we go. I'm not sure how obvious or obscure it was, but the framework of questions that I sent you lean toward answering what an RPG is. They lean toward showing how system matters to how we play. They lay a foundation for exploring what an RPG can even be, and expose why some games or some game formats, like playing online or playing solo or playing by post, even when there's a lot of commitment and excitement, can still fail. So, to begin, I'd like to know where you all are right now in this moment regarding the abstractness or concreteness of this, like this umbrella idea that conversation is the medium of RPGs. And let's start with Daniel.
Spotlight.
No pressure.
Yeah, it was a really interesting framing of the conversation. Conversation about conversation. We're meta. Um, yeah, I need some back and forth because I'm going to go too broad if I don't have something
Sure.
to pull me.
Okay. James Bacon.
Oh, sure. Where am I on the concreteness? I currently at this moment think that it is a true and accurate statement to say that conversation is the medium of role play. And I actually did quite a bit of thinking about this. It struck me funny because after you had invited me to participate and we had gone through the process of those preliminary background questions, I released my own video tangentially related to the topic, though I came to discover a bit more directly than I'd thought. And in that video, I discuss how the process of role playing, it is an individual experience in a group setting, and it's an internal, external, internal sort of process, right? How is that different from painting, right? I conceptualize the painting, I produce the painting, and then other people who view the painting are internalizing that. So it's a very similar process. However, within the context of role playing, there's a participatory element that the audience then gets to contribute. And that, I think, is the key element of describing what role play is. It's that bounce back. And that bounce back is conversation. That's the communication that takes place. It can be written, it can be spoken, it can be body language. There's many different elements to conversation, but that is ultimately what I landed on as the key element. So that's where I stand. I think it's a pretty concrete statement to say that conversation is the medium.
Feel free. I'm not going to call you by name for most of it. Just dive in.
Yeah, okay. So just like when we're kids and we're make believe, um, it is of course conversation, but this one has what I think of as a conversation with an agenda. You have a very specific goal. It's not just hanging out and free flowing as much as you could. When we're kids and we're make believe, there seem to be no guardrails, or if there are, they're so obscured that you can't point to them. With role playing, there is an agenda, and that matters significantly, because you're all trying consciously to combine everyone's picture, everyone's sense of the world, sense of this activity. Um, so that's the first one that strikes me, and the second one that comes in is how system mechanics and the methods also steer conversation, because they are the guardrails and the like objective adjudication. So like role playing is make believe, but it has this other facet which distinguishes it, right? Which are these objective adjudications for things. When we're kids and we talk about, okay, I'm Superman and I fly, or I'm Bilbo and I can do whatever. And, as kids, maybe we call each other out, especially when we're doing superhero against each other, right? Um, so those are things that stick out to me as changing it from the old make believe.
Jay.
Yeah. Well,
Abstract, concrete.
I don't even know what you mean, really. Like conversation is how concrete is that? Um, yeah. So there's an interaction going on between people that is what a conversation, I guess, kind of boils down to. I noticed quite a few different things though. I noticed that that isn't necessarily like as Bacon said, like it can be written, it can be spoken, it can be actually just expressional, body movement. It can be, but there's also an internal dialogue that I think people are having, and that's part of it. And that's fascinating when you get to solo role playing as a concept, because I think there's that internal dialogue gets dialed right up, as I suspect. Is it, like I really got into the question of whether it's possible to solo role play actually, and that's kind of, but where I'm at is, yeah, it's this interaction with others. I actually recently just been playing with a new role player who his key observation is that the most exciting part of it is exactly that, like you have something in your mind that has been conjured, by a description, and then as others interact with that and take action or get into involved in an interaction, or react to something, but the whole thing becomes a kind of gestalt shared thing. And what's really exciting is discovering what other people are going to do in that imagined environment through that conversational stuff. So it seems very tangible to me, even though, let's be honest, the imagination is one of the least tangible aspects of what it means to be a human being. If we're gonna, this table in front of me is really tangible to me. Yeah.
Right.
But somehow, weirdly, that imaginary world can feel just as tangible, and perhaps even in some ways more so, even though it really isn't.
Right. The word imagination that we cling to, or have no choice but to cling to, covers a multitude of abilities and sins and the like. And it's the one we recognize. So when we try and branch out from it, then we kind of run into trouble. But it sounds like everybody's in a place where this statement conversation is, the medium of RPGs has actual relevance, has an actual application to things that you do as gamers. So that's a good place to be for this discussion.
Mm-hmm.
So let's move on. Like I said before, if the spirit moves you, leap in. And otherwise, then I'll be forced to spotlight.
Understood.
So I'd like you to consider your default preference for play. This might not be how you are currently playing or where you're trying to push yourself, like to develop as a player, but what are your default preferences for play? I think we all have our own natural biases, and these turn into preferences over time, right? And when we observe play, we can see signs of that variation from person to person. So among your preferences, right, I'm curious about the role, as Che was talking about, the role of imagination, whether that's, imagination that you are bringing forth to imagine, to visualize, to conceive of a moment, or ones that are sparked, that come unbidden. And compare that to that active thought that Daniel was talking about, right? Of conceiving of the moment, right? So if we could look at it as a spectrum from imagination coming unbidden, reactions coming from an instinctual or emotional place, right, in the moment, all the way down to the other end of the spectrum where everything is considered, everything is as add or remove, right? And maybe not even imagined in that sense at all, right? Where do you fall along that spectrum naturally?
Yes.
I was going to say something similar.
And that's a wrap.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Well, that will be interesting to hear about. So, who wants to go first?
I just did, yes.
I'm happy to continue to go first, but I'm also happy to give way as well.
Go, Bacon.
Okay. So I am, much like Che said, yes. I like to maintain as much, and here's a word that I've been hearing more and more, the verisimilitude of the shared imagined space.
Mm-hmm.
In order to do that, I think that reacting as a human person is what's typically best. And I think that to react as a human person, there are going to be times where, the bile rises in your throat and you react immediately. There are going to be times where you back off and consider something before you put forth some measured action or proposition. And I think that in the moment, depending on the moment, and also the group, and also the GM, and also this gestalt of the currently existing reality of the shared imagined space, obviously so many tributaries, that any one of those elements in the moment could be valid. It's just how would I react? How would not, I don't even say, I try to avoid saying my character. I frequently do that because my default is to be as in character as much as is possible. There are certainly concessions that I make to that. But that's where I am. So I think that it is, though I will say this, I think that I'm more on the extreme of reactive and less on the extreme of considering everything. I feel that if you take the time to consider everything, including character, emotion, how would my character feel instead of just being in the moment and feeling that it broadens that layer of disconnect between player and character. And I want that to be as tamped down and small as possible. So I will say that I try to, not always successful, but I try to keep further away from that extreme of the spectrum.
Sure. And that's where I was trying to get at with the framing of the question about your default, right? You are playing it might be one of those lucky moments where you're not actually thinking about how you're playing. And so what does that, how does that express itself, right? Are we thinking about what would my character do? What should my character do in this moment? What would be appropriate for a character arc, right? That's moving in one direction in the spectrum. And then the king said what, right? The smuggler said what? No way I'm allowing that to ride. I'm, and you're in the moment. These things they can't exist in the moment at the same time. They have to, right, so. Daniel, I see you nodding.
Yeah, so I was just thinking of so we have Descartes' demon, and then we have Putnam's brain in a vat. And the reason this is so important is because the only thing in life that we have direct access to is ourselves, is our inner state. And this is true of all relationships, regardless of how intimate, your wife or your best friends or whatever. You can have these moments where the connection is close, but nothing compares to the direct experience I have with me. Okay, so with make believe or with role playing, it we have to let go of the fact that we're going to have perfect synchronicity. That can never ever happen with anything, any relationship can't ever happen with perfection. But this activity can have those moments of spark. And so in the conversations, in the gaming, like you just described, you can have these moments where you're so in sync with what this group is creating that you feel it. You feel that I am this person and we are in this world. And you've forgotten that you stepped into the holodeck. And so you'll remember the next gen episode where there's this group of aliens and the world is falling apart. And so the Enterprise beams them up into the holodeck where they make a journey. You guys remember this? And they end up in another world. And so not knowing that you're in the holodeck, or in our case, not being conscious or not being overly conscious that you're playing a role-playing game. So I mean, that's the picture that I pursue. Yeah, I don't know if that muddied the water or cleared it. I don't know what it did. Che, you can
It speaks to your preferences, right? Che, what do you got?
Yeah.
It's probably going to sound a little bit mystical on one level, but essentially what I am trying, so like every character that if I'm role playing, every character has something of me in it because I'm me. That's a given. But when I create and conceive of a character first, it's like it'll be what's the difference, and then I'll try and inhabit that difference. And I suppose the best way I can explain it is that when I'm really there, it's when it feels like I'm channeling that individual. That I've called something down, and I am giving it body.
Yeah.
Which probably sounds kind of weird, but exactly that. And it's but that's exactly how it feels. And there are some moments, the best moments, are the moments where I am saying, or I'm saying either words as my character, or I am declaring action, if we're going to be like technical about it. But essentially, I don't consciously really quite know where that's coming from, except from the character, and it might not actually be what I would choose. And so the most exciting bit is when the character is somebody who I am very much not. So I mean, we can have this kind of power fantasy thing that a lot of people talk about, but for me, it isn't really about that. It's about it being in a different psychological state, I guess, if you want to be a bit more material about it.
Empathy.
Yeah, but I think it's actually allowing a different kind of being to inhabit me for a while, and just express through. And yeah, like Daniel said, like in my mind, the picture becomes very, very much. I'm aware I'm in the room, but my mind is really focused on this other image and this other set of experiences and emotions, thoughts. And like Bacon, I'm not really very. It's not a. There is not a big consideration. Like it's not like I've got compartmentalized mind anymore. It's actually that the mind is focused in one thing. If that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. And if you would allow me, I'd love to comment on what it was that you just said.
Mm-hmm.
So first, I have never in my life concepted a character by starting off with how they're different from me.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that approach to be revelatory and it's almost like a no duh statement, right? But it's so incredibly important. I will be making characters with that at the forefront now, because I think that what happens is that you come up with I come up with a character concept and I sort of just allow those differences to sort themselves out as I'm drafting the character or in play. But actually focusing on how they're not me, I think is absolutely brilliant. The second thing I want to say is that I don't think it sounds weird at all, you calling something down into the performance or into your mind or however you want to phrase it. I actually have an ongoing asterisk series on Jung and how archetypes affect play and how the collective unconscious, which is the framework within what I'll get there. It's the framework within which these archetypes operate. And so calling them down, be it the hero or the sage or the creator or whatever you're pulling down at any given moment through a personal filter in order to evoke that in play, I think that's the way that I view it. Now, not every game is going to be that way, and I make sure that I'm careful to state that up front. But I don't think that what you said is at all in out of the norm, and I am actually very excited to hear that someone else views it in this fashion. Whether or not you think Young is full of it, that's fine if you do. Many
I love
people do.
Young. So
Well,
that's fine.
awesome. That's incredible. That's absolutely incredible. Just
Yeah.
this is reaffirming and validating and exciting, and I agree with everything that you said.
Yeah, to build on that, I think the via negativa, like what something is not, is a really powerful tool in any philosophy, right? And especially in expressing like an idea, like what is it not? It's a really useful thing.
It is. It
Um,
is.
but I think actually, yeah, like for me, it's those elements of because there's things obviously within me, right? But it's actually about summing of the things I deny about myself. So like if I was
The
going to play
shadow.
the
Yeah. Oh,
yeah
absolutely.
playing the role of a thief, summoning up the shadow of,
Yeah.
of what is generosity's shadow. It's
Yes.
a really
Yes.
interesting kind of
What
thing.
is the caregiver's shadow? What I
Mhm.
am on board with all of this.
Yep. So
Right
yeah,
on.
I just wanted to kind of flesh that out a little bit. Yeah, but I actually think like this idea of the collective unconscious is something that the more I role play, the more I can become convinced that he's onto something.
Yes. Me too.
Yeah.
Me too.
I'm going to move over the next prompt to get to the prompt after it because that ties into what we're talking about. So, Che has brought up the internal conversation, right? And all of this Jungian aspect, or the way that we are perceiving the character, ties into that. So, there's an aspect of play where everything is shared. We externalize our internal understanding of the moment. There's many things, perhaps, maybe, that as play goes on, where we move away from that. We stop citing the rules. We stop explaining the things that we always explain, and they become habitual. The people that we play with come to expect and understand them. Right? How do you feel that voicing this kind of stuff, the things that we over time internalize, how do you feel that voicing or not voicing things influences play? I'm going to give you some examples. Bacon was recently talking about the notion of it doesn't happen if you don't say it, and it has its twin. It does happen if you do say it. Now, this can be an example of good play. It can also be the source of many errors in play. You're expressing a thought. People take it as that's a statement of action, that kind of thing. The story of the Dread Gazebo. Everyone's familiar with the Dread Gazebo?
One of my favorites. One of my favorites.
Right. Preparation errors, right? Variations in understanding within the group, right? We're all in the same place. We've all heard the same descriptions of the setting, but over time, we start being in a different place. Variations in presentation or errors in presentation. Player versus character skill. Right? How we can conceive of an action. Player skill versus player skill. Or variations in genre, idiom, setting, tone, these kinds of things, as what we don't say or what we do say causes drift. And so what's your reaction to the argument that all information should be shared in play, right? Thoughts, feelings, signaling character arcs, what have you.
It's like saying you should list all the facts of a situation to be able to understand it, and that's not how humans work. Humans work on there's I don't know, something like 7 million things per second that our sensors are picking up, and our brains are filtering that hugely. And then what emerges is what becomes meaningful and noticed by us as objects is like, like a coalescence of a certain amount of facts. I'm looking at a cup on the table, and we get to the philosophical question of what gives the cup its cuppiness. There's a whole load of things that make a cup and not a glass. It's really hard to like pick apart, but actually we just know. And I think actually my view is trying to list all of those facts and be as comprehensive as possible is impossible. We can't even do that consciously with the world we're sitting in. So why would we try and do that with a world that we're imagining? I think actually what's been more effective, and I've experienced this with you, Anthony, when playing with you, is this idea of a sketched description. And I've been encouraging players to feel free to include details not mentioned if they're in your imagination. I go to the kitchen. I'm assuming there's a kettle in here. I'm not going to go, is there a kettle in the kitchen? I'm just going to go, I go to the kettle and I turn it on and I make myself a cup of tea because that's what I'm imagining in my mind. It's a kitchen. Now, all of our kitchens in our heads are different. It doesn't really matter. And I think what we do is we work together. There's an element of working together to just include those details that have been described and do our best with it. And it's okay that it sometimes goes wrong. And actually, in those moments, I think that actually that happens so infrequently. Yeah, actually, much less frequently than we realize. In a kind of in a kind of way that is really jarring to anybody. I think actually most of the time people just gently in their minds, especially with trust amongst people, actually just adjust those things in their minds. But that's my view.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's both impossible and counterproductive. And this also extends to mechanics, like trying to get all the way down to counting every grain of sand. It's impossible and it's a waste of your time and it defeats the purpose. So yeah, just like Chase said, you give you follow the Pareto principle, right? You just give enough of the substantial, which takes minimal effort, and let it go. But I will add that there is so much to be gained with before play, out of play, um, drawing a picture, especially with settings. So this is vital that you say, okay, we're aiming toward um, fifth and sixth century Britain. And if the person is aware of it, great because you've just done so much to flesh out a general picture of the world without having to waste any game time doing it. But if they don't know anything about 6th century Britain, and you say, okay, we're going to role play this ancient slash medieval setting, um, you're in for a lot of potholes in the road. So I think pre and outside of gaming conversations, working on getting on that same page, and I guess this is true of all settings, um, that if you don't do that, that it's going to be diminished. It's going to have all those potholes as you're trying to drive down that road.
Hmm. And I mean, to back that up, I would just add that that's one of the reasons why I would always prefer for the most grounded in our actual human experience baseline and deviate from there. And again, come back to my earlier point of what is different is a great building block from that, you know. So in some respects, we're living like a role-playing game set in the modern world is in one sense the easiest thing to do with some people.
Yeah.
You know, but actually, yeah, I'm with you on that. And I also think, by the way, that is a reason why I believe it's really important to educate oneself if you're going to go and draw on another part of history, even if it's only just cursory. And perhaps the best education is actually the shorthand of going and look at some paintings, photographs, whatever, artifacts,
Mhm.
you know, things that you can actually just visually, because vision is our primary thing, I suppose, for the majority of us. So, you know, putting aside people who don't have vision, that is actually like our primary sense for most human beings. I think like just taking a visual cues like that is a really useful starting point.
Sharing the source material
Mm.
among you so we can reach some form of agreement. Yeah.
I generally, I'm sorry, Anthony, did I interrupt?
Continue.
Okay. Pardon me. I agree with myself in that if you don't say it, it doesn't happen. But I think that there are words there or a word there that's doing a lot of the heavy lifting, right? So happen, that being some sort of observable action that's taking place in the world. In the video that I recorded and published about this topic, I misspoke. I say in that video twice, if you don't say it, it doesn't exist. And that is not true.
Yeah.
That is not what I intended to say. I don't think, excuse me,
It's
I
hard to
don't think
avoid
that it really,
that one.
yeah. And I don't think it really affected the point that I was making. Obviously, I was just interchanging vocabulary, but I try to be as specific as I can and use the correct vocabulary. And so, obviously, getting to what Daniel and Che both said, I agree that over explanation and even unnecessary explanation, which might not be over explanation, ends up becoming detrimental, right? I'm not going to stand here and tell you that I am angry at a situation as a character, not as a player. I'm not going to stand here and tell you I am angry because X just happened. I am going to describe my actions in such a way that would indicate anger, maybe subtly, maybe overtly, depends on the situation. But I think that just directly making certain statements with regard to the internal activity or internal experience, it disallows the role play in that moment because you're trying to be in that moment. I'm not going to, sometimes I'll tell you I'm angry. Oh, that really made me angry. Other times I'm just going to leave and slam the door. And I feel like that when you get stuck on this idea of explaining, oh, well, my character feels this, my character feels that, my character is thinking this is their internal monologue, that becomes extremely counterproductive, as Daniel said, to the experience. I think that's
right to that experience.
Mm-hmm.
It's fundamental to the other experience, but that's not where we as a group are sitting. So our tendencies push us in that direction.
I think it's interesting that we have this, like in human experience, we have this attentional thing where, where I am now, I'm talking to you guys, there are actually loads of things going on around me, but my attention is focused on you. And I think like with a role-playing game, what you want to be trying to do is draw attention to what is important in the moment for the character in terms of action, words, and it may well be that they're going to voice an emotion, but actually, yeah, what is the attention needs to be on what's happening, because again, it is primarily an action kind of the situation is always expressed through activity, action,
Yes.
just as they are in reality. You know, whatever I'm feeling, as Daniel said, you can't know what I'm feeling unless I show you or I tell you. And actually, most of the time, I show you, and then you misread it. So, because we and by the way, it is okay for us to misread the other players' actions and intentions as well.
Yes.
And in fact, as a GM, something I like to do is directly misdirect, but intentionally misdirect.
Mhm.
To be a little bit ambiguous about, or more ambiguous about what an NPC wants through what they do. But the important thing I think is understanding that we do not, in fact, pay attention to every fact, every detail within any situation, and we only notice a fraction of that. If we're not expecting something, is well established, we will not probably not notice it. And again, these are all different things to be aware of. And then to just not sweat, I think. Actually, when we become aware of the limitations of our attentional focus and all of that in reality, I think we become a heck of a lot more relaxed about what we do at the role playing game table, because most of it doesn't matter, if that makes sense. What matters is the key, the focus right now, and yeah, I just think kind of keeping the description, sketching out the scene, the situation, and then allowing characters to interact within that and do things, and wherever whatever is they're working on, that's where the attention's going, and that's where we are describing in more detail. We will drill down a little bit into what actually happens. I don't know if that's helping.
Yeah, like we've talked about, attention guides experience.
Hmm.
And so the role of the GM conventionally is to guide the attention. And if we're, to the extent that that is not enriching the big picture, it's damaging the experience. But I mean, also just how in the 2020s, attention is just a withered, dead tree with maybe a branch that's surviving underneath. And I mean, this is why two things. It's why the role-playing experience is not as rich as it could be most of the time for most people, because you're not um, as a group, you're not zooming in on the shared imaginary world and the experience of being these other people. But the second point is how helpful role playing can be for teaching attention if it's done right, because there is um, there's no richness of experience where you just have shallow distraction bouncing you back and forth. Um, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about something that you just said, Daniel, if I may. And I tried to capture it, and I failed. You said that as far as the GM is concerned, that they're a guide, they're focusing the attention. Again, I agree. I've published videos about how, relating back to Jung, I believe that the GM is actually a modern day secular shaman within the context of a role playing game. Not always, but they can be. And you said if they do not contribute to the something, I can't remember if it was overall experience or the attention of the situation, it's detrimental to the experience.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever heard it expressed that way. And it was extremely deft. And if you can recall the actual words that you had said, I would love to hear it back, because I think that it's very clear and succinct, and it encapsulates quite a bit. And I think that it is absolutely true.
Yeah,
But I can't remember what exactly you said. I just remember
I don't
remember my
either.
ears picking up and going, "Oh, that's
Rewind.
incredible."
Good.
Yeah,
Rewind
yeah,
thing,
we'll
you
have to
recorded
replay
it.
it. No, just
Yeah.
just that the GM is guiding the attention.
Yes.
The
Oh, the
GM
attention.
is, yeah,
Okay. Okay.
yeah, and it's like giving the scenery or giving what someone looks like, or those kinds of things, and what you're not guiding attention to.
Hmm.
And so, I mean, as I'm always preaching, if you guide attention to mechanics, you've just pulled them out of
Yes.
the thing that I'm at least after, that
Yes.
that rich otherworldliness. So I mean, that's why I go all the way to no rules for the players at the table.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you kindly for filling that blank in.
yeah.
I think that that's a very um, important statement.
Yeah, again, we're back to what's not said being actually hugely important, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah,
What is it not?
Mm.
right. And the notion that you brought up about taking care to ground yourself in whatever setting it is that the group has chosen to play, being aware of the limitations of our communication, right? So if we can't see the body language, we've truncated a significant portion of the message if we're not including emotional content in our tone, right? The character's angry, so the tone is angry, even if the words are kind and polite. Thank you very much for that message. You know,
Mhm.
we can find ourselves, missing out, and the essentials, the elements that are essential to coordinate our shared experience, then begin to become bigger and bigger, where it forces us into a position where we have to explain more. Right? Someone at the table doesn't understand the setting, so we have to explain it to them or leave them out. And where you are as players will determine what your reaction is. You isolate them from the experience because they don't pull their weight, or you help them become a part of the group. But either way, your conversation has changed, right? Your position has shifted. So it's good stuff. Good stuff. All right. Let's leap back to a slightly lighter question to round out the conversation. So, these days, a lot of people are kind of doing a archaeological expedition and resurrecting old games more so than ever before, and they're trying different ways to play that they think people did in the past or that they used to do, but for whatever reason they haven't done for a long time, and they're starting to do again. So I'm talking about playing with miniatures, not playing with miniatures. I'm talking about playing solo, huge groups, West Marches style, show up when you can kind of play, what have you, right? So all these different ways to play, particularly now the opportunity for observed play, where the observer can in some way at some point interact with the players. All of these things are having an influence on the conversation. So what kind of effect do you see in your own circles, right? All of these changes might have, are having, can have.
Well, my group's just on the same page about so many things, and we just intentionally ignore a lot of it just because we've kind of already decided where we want to be. And there was also, this is many years ago, conversations with my fellow nerds about, you know, the nostalgia of talking about when we played as teenagers and tweenagers, and that so we have this powerful body of nostalgia, right? And we did have miniatures, and we did, this is 1,000 years ago with AD&D, like second edition. Um, but we realized that trying to replicate nostalgia never pays off. And you end up like, oh, it's like going back, like I had a memory of Mel Brooks being really funny. But the truth is, when you watch one of his movies, about 4% is really funny, and the rest is eh. But anyway, the whole let's go back to what things were like when we were kids. It doesn't work unless those methods happen to pay off for you where you are right now. I should say that. Um, so yeah, and so we kind of ignore a lot of the noise of the trends that you're talking about. My group, at least.
I just wanted to say that for me, it's like Gansfield, is it the Gansfeld effect? The idea of like if you remove as much stimulus as possible from like human consciousness, then we start conjuring like stuff in our minds. That actually, so I guess that's why I'm invoking that because I'm saying what I'm trying to do at the moment is just strip all of that away, take away everything that distracts me from and my players from being a character in an other world that I want to inhabit with them. And like I'm going through this process of just slowly stripping our group away from these things, and heading towards where Daniel and I know we share this kind of common desire. If I had my way, everything would be like everything mechanistic would be in the hands of the GM, and everything else would be like it was. This dialogue could be as pure as we can possibly make it, knowing that it can never be 100%. But just want to be there and inhabit that place, and everything else is just a distraction. The only thing that was really useful to me from all of the mining from the past is partly just understanding the journey. That's really always really helpful. I'm fascinated by that. But actually, it was the thing about Sandy Eisen from I think it's from the Peterson's book. What's it
The
called?
elusive shift.
Yeah, elusive
Yeah.
shift. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Where just like I suddenly realized there was another person out there who wanted what I wanted, which was to, in his case, stand in that dungeon and feel the dripping on my skin and the
And
cold
they
around
wanted
my
it 50
feet.
years ago.
Yeah, and he wanted
Yeah.
it 50 years ago. And actually, his solution is the same solution. Just take everything else away and don't let the players have anything other than the description,
Yeah.
evoke it.
Yeah.
And and another thing I just wanted to say on this is that for me, what I'm focusing on is invoking, and evoking. And I mean those words in their true meaning. Both those things kind of happen in terms of invoking place and then evoking emotion, right? So yeah, it's kind of I'm blurbling, but that's like everything else is just I'm fine with if people want to play with miniatures or that's go knock yourself out. And I actually enjoy tactical skirmish war games, but it's not role playing. And there's so many things I love, like that are kind of adjacent to this hobby or part of this hobby or whatever. I just really love, but they're not actually role playing. Being there as if I am here.
I agree with that. There are a lot of big opinions that I have that I'll spare this particular group from in the moment.
No,
But I agree.
don't
I
hold
think
back,
that
man.
I think that there are I think that there is a lot of activity that's tangential to role playing that is sort of almost accidentally included in actual role playing. Um, and so but with regard to the question and answering it, I think as directly as I can, and seeing people going back and playing with miniatures and observed play in particular, I think was maybe the thrust of the question at hand. I think that we're probably witnessing, as they did in the past, as wargaming had this branch that eventually ended up becoming role playing. We're probably watching this happen in a very schismatic kind of way, where so many of these different things are being added over time that we're actually watching a spiderweb effect take place. And there are other activities that may or may not achieve their own names in the
Hmm.
practice. But I think that that's what we're watching. And I think that it's natural to want to call that a part of the trunk of what it came out of. It was natural to want to call role playing a part of wargaming. In fact, it still is in some circles, depending on who you ask. There's a lot of statements about, oh, well, it came out of wargaming, it came out of wargaming. Not false, but also I think that you're leaning on that
It came
statement a
out
little
of
bit more
war
heavily.
gamers.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah, right.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so I think that we're watching a sort of stratification, diversification of the activity into other activities, which I'm very uh, permissive of. Do it. You know, if that's what you enjoy, if that's the thing that you want to do, go ahead and do it. But like you said, Che, I don't think that a lot of that is role play, and I prefer to role play. And then to just drive briefly at something that you had said, Daniel, regarding nostalgia and how you can never really achieve it. Um, there's a saying in groups that I run with, whenever something new that is like a revision or a remaster or something like that that shows up, sort of trying to evoke that nostalgia from the past, there's an extremely rare type of media that will come up, and again, I'll spare you the details, but it will come up and it will be as though you remembered it instead of how it was. They took what it was and they really sat down and thought about it. And you can tell the people who usually are able to produce these types of things loved whatever it is that they're adding to or remastering, and they make it how they remembered it instead of how it was. And I agree with you. I think that nostalgia it's all in your head. Trying to achieve something that happened in the past can be a bit of a mind trap, because I don't think that you'll really ever get there. It is a moment in time. It is a zeitgeist. It is an attitude. It is an age. It is a physicality that you just cannot return to. And I just wanted to, further endorse that point. I think it's absolutely correct.
I want to go further because there's some strong psychological evidence suggests that when we open a memory, we alter it. So
Yeah.
in fact, by going
Oh,
back into a memory and like trying to evoke that, relive that, we essentially overlap it with our current experience, and our memory becomes changed, and we
Yeah.
actually let go and lose the thing we had.
yes.
So I don't know,
Yeah.
some danger, no, but like be aware that you will change your memory when you go remember.
I am actually currently working on a setting, and I hate to say that because I don't want to
Mm.
tell anyone I'm working on anything until it's done or I'm far enough along. Just I think that that's the kiss of death, is to say, well, I'm working on this,
Yeah.
but I am working on something that profound loss is actually the theme, because I think profound loss is the human condition. I have the experience of growing up in a hometown, leaving for a decade, and then returning. It's not the same place. It just
Mm.
isn't. And
Yeah.
the fact that it isn't the same place to everyone who grew up there is lost on them because they watched the change.
Yeah.
I don't have that change. So that's a really kind of big emotional hurdle to deal with.
Mm.
To return to the place that you grew up and see the school looks nothing like what it did when you went there. The floors are different. They've added things. There's a new football field or something like that. To see the businesses have all changed. The place you love to get a cheesesteak is now not there anymore. There is something to profound loss as a very major piece of the human condition that I
Yeah.
think is very important, and I think would be very successful within a role playing game.
Mm. And also, you changed, right?
Yeah.
Oh yes, for sure.
I think it's important to also add to this part. I don't know how far we've gotten away from the original
We're
question,
we're still good.
um, but like chasing nostalgia, at the heart of it, what you want is a rich, fulfilling experience.
Right.
And the
Nostalgia
danger
is the
of,
indicator that joy is possible, right? We
yeah,
remember this
yeah,
great moment.
yeah. So the real danger of, and you see this on Twitter, people just gushing over the joy they had with D&D early variations, and it's very difficult to separate the member beings. I remember how wonderful it was,
Mm.
with, are you actually enjoying these mechanics, these settings, these methodologies? And
Yes.
so the danger is, okay, you want joy, you're pursuing the wrong thing to get joy. If these exact things you're doing right now within themselves do not give you that joy, because you're grasping after, your teenage first love, which was all illusion anyway. You were a young idiot. and we're dominated by your hormones, dominated by the novelty of it, blah blah blah. And so I people are ripping themselves off in those
Yeah.
cases, and so I there is a danger to nostalgia. There's a real
I
detriment.
agree. I think that it is an attempt at achieving a a once upon a time ignorance, because that's really where that foundational joy kind of came from, when you have the perspective of the experience of a life lived, right? So when you're looking backwards, as Chase said, you are changed, you are different. And I think that trying to look backwards at something that once brought you joy without considering what you didn't know, how the world was, all those elements, is dangerous. I agree.
So this brings us to what should be the end of our time, although I'm deeply enjoying this conversation. I hate to break it off at this point. But I have one kind of observation to make way back at the beginning of this hour of conversation. I asked you where you fell along a spectrum, right? And we started out saying, we are the spectrum, we are the world. And then we kind of collapsed down in waveform more to the imaginative side.
Mm-hmm.
And here's where we're ending up. We're talking about, well, this is role playing and this isn't, or these things are tangential to role play and these things aren't. But I wonder if, conversation is the medium of RPGs. These elements that people add or remove from their conversation are telling us about their inner life, the presence or the absence of that imaginative spark, right? That one that comes unbidden versus the one they have to build brick by brick. And maybe the miniatures are there because that sparks the imagination. Or maybe they're further along toward needing that cognitive understanding, right? Imagination is so far removed from what they're doing. They're problem solving, they're enjoying the tactics, they're enjoying the strategies, they're enjoying the relationships, they're very, very busy, they're very, very occupied, very, very satisfied with the other information in the conversation, right? And it makes me wonder what a role-playing game can be, right? And really how far are we going to have to push along these different ends of the spectrum before we can truly leave it? And I'm not sure if that question is worth answering, as long as we're having discussions like these where we can come to an agreement of what we together want as a group of players with this particular game in this particular moment, in this particular time. But I think it is important to ask the question. So thank you for exploring it with me for this, what seemed to me very brief time, and for you, I'm sure, was longer.
No, this is great. No, this
Yeah,
is
I
a great
loved it. I
conversation.
loved every moment.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, each of these gents and the three others from the video before all recorded a 5 to 8 minute message about their thoughts and some background material. That material is available. You can find it linked in the description below. You'll also find links to all these gentlemen's pages and podcasts and YouTube phenomena and all of that stuff. So I do hope you will check it out and understand more deeply why I invited them here to be with me today. But until the next time, take care.
You guys.
Thanks.
Take care, all. Thank you.